Are Mistborn truly all gone? Absolutely not. In fact, I believe there is at least 2 Mistborn still around. A quick refresher in Mistborn Era 1 history. Being a Mistborn, someone who could use every elementic metal, steel, pewter, tin, brass, zinc, the whole set, was extremely rare. By the time we get to Mistborn Era 2, that level of ability has basically become a myth. By this era, Mistines and even Twinborn exist, but a full Mistborn, that's more of like a legendary or historical thing where people told histories about Vin and Kelsier and the Lord Ruler. And the in-world explanation for why Mistborn disappeared is pretty simple. Early on, Mistborn exists because of something called Lerasium. If you don't remember that name, no worries. Here's the only part that matters. Lerasium is the substance that can turn a normal person into a full Mistborn. It's the reason the first Mistborn bloodlines exist at all, and by the time we're in Era 2, that stuff is basically gone, used up, lost. So again, Mistborn are gone, except there's one problem. Brandon Sanderson has never actually given closure to the person I believe is the last surviving Mistborn, a character who was directly remade into a Mistborn at the end of Era 1, a character who ruled most of Scadrial for an absurdly long time after the Cassandra, and also a character we know who has been secretly working with Kelsier studying Hemalurgy, and that character is Spook. Before we get into exactly how Spook became a Mistborn and what proof we have that he is still alive, if you appreciate these videos and love learning more about the Cosmere, it would mean the world to me if you hit that like button or subscribe if you haven't already. That's all. It may not bring Vin back, but it'll help out the channel more than you can imagine. So thank you very much. Okay, so let's slow down a sec and rebuild the basics, because a lot of this hinges on assumptions people make without realizing it. So let's start very simply. Like I mentioned, a Mistborn is someone who can use all of the elementic metals: steel, pewter, tin, zinc, brass, copper, bronze, every power, one person. And that's what made characters like Kelsier, Vin, and the Lord Ruler so powerful. Most people on Scadrial, even during the Final Empire, were not like that. The vast majority of Allomancers were Mistines, people who could burn one metal. A tin eye, a coin shot, a smoker, that's it. Mistborn were extremely rare even back then. And where did they come from? The answer is Lerasium. Lerasium is a god metal specifically tied to preservation, and it does one extremely important thing. If a normal person consumes it, they become a full Mistborn. Instantly, permanently, no bloodline required. And that's how the very first Mistborn existed. People consumed Lerasium beads near the Well of Ascension, and those powers were then passed down genetically, getting weaker and more diluted over the generations. This is why Mistborn were becoming more and more rare, even during Era 1, each generation becoming less and less powerful. Eventually, instead of a full Mistborn, you mostly get Mistines. And then comes the Cassandra. So Sazed ascends, preservation and ruin combine into harmony, and the world is remade. And critically, there is now no new Lerasium being produced in any meaningful way. By the time we reach Mistborn Era 2, the Wax and Wane books, the in-world belief is basically settled. Mistborn are gone. Not rare, they're not hiding, they're just flat out gone. And that belief makes sense. No Lerasium, diluted bloodlines, harmony actively reshaping the world, everything points towards Mistborn being a closed chapter. But here's the thing that often gets glossed over. What about any Mistborn still surviving from the original trilogy? And that's when Spook comes in. When we first meet Spook, his real name is Lestiborns, he's very young, awkward, and easy to overlook. Even within Kelsier's crew, he's a tin eye, which is certainly useful, yes, but rarely essential. And that's the point. Spook's defining trait early on isn't strength, it's invisibility. He's the person who gets sent away, the person who survives because he wasn't important enough to be present when things went wrong. And then Kelsier dies, and the Siege of Lucidale happens, where his uncle Club dies without him, and that absence eats at him. By the time the Hero of Ages begins, Spook is carrying a very specific emotional weight, the guilt of survival. He didn't die with the others, he didn't matter enough to be there. So at Urchio, where we see Spook given responsibility for the first time, it goes badly. He ends up burning tin constantly, flares it far past what's safe, and while he does end up becoming a tin savant, He's also pretty broken. His senses are so sharp that even a small amount of light or sound can be overwhelmingly painful. But after the Cassandra, when the world is remade and Sazed has ascended, and in the middle of all that, Harmony does something a bit strange. Not only does he heal Spook from the effects of his tin savantism, but he actually remakes Spook into a full-blown Mistborn. Now what happens after this? Spook rules as a king for roughly 100 years. The books are explicit about this. He becomes known as Lord Mistborn, governing the Elendil Basin and shaping early post-Cassandra society. And then, after 100 years or so, he steps down. He's not assassinated, he's not overthrown, he just abdicates. And that's where things get suspicious, because we never get really any confirmation that he died. And for a character this important, that should ring some alarms, especially when you remember two more things. First, we know Spook has had ongoing contact with Kelsier after Kelsier's death, collaborating and experimenting with Hemalurgy. Second, Brandon Sanderson has been asked repeatedly about Spook's ultimate fate, and he always refuses to answer if Spook is dead.
Is Spook still alive?
Rafa! Ooh, you're getting a...
Okay, I get the question that might be coming into your head. How could Spook still be alive this long? And I'll give you two ways. First is via cadmium and time dilation. Burning cadmium is one of those abilities that sounds weak until you realize what it potentially can do. Burning cadmium creates a bubble of slowed time around yourself. Everybody outside that bubble experiences time normally, but inside it, it looks like time is speeding up and things go by very quickly, which means that if you sit inside that bubble for a few hours or days or longer, the rest of the world races ahead without you. That's just essentially time travel, and it's the ability we see Mercy Combs have in the second era of Mistborn. And here's where Spook comes back into the conversation. Here's a word of Brandon you need to hear.
Was Spook still alive when they figured out the allomantic properties of cadmium and bend alloy and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Did you learn how to use them and travel into the future?
You will find more out about Spook's fate. How about that?
That'll
It
work.
has not been. There is more coming about Spook.
Now that gives this theory quite a bit of weight, because if Spook understood cadmium, then suddenly his long reign and his quiet disappearance afterward look very different. His disappearance makes a lot more sense if he's currently in a time bubble traveling further into the future. Now, is this confirmed? No. Is this mechanically sound? Absolutely. And more importantly, it solves a very specific problem. It explains how Spook could rule for 100 years and continue to survive far into the future. But that's not the only way Spook could still be alive. The other thing we need to consider is based on his deep research into hemalurgy and compounding. Hemalurgy is easily one of Cosmere's darkest magic systems for a reason. You steal power by killing somebody else and essentially stapling that stolen power onto your soul using metal spikes. And Spook is not just familiar with hemalurgy, he literally studied and wrote an entire book on it. After the Cassandra, Spook works directly with Kelsier to study hemalurgy's rules, limits, and applications. So Spook understands an enormous amount about hemalurgy, which means that Spook has the knowledge to combine his allomantic powers with any feruchemic power that he'd like. This, by the way, is called compounding. Compounding allows you to store an attribute like health, age, or strength in a metal mind, and then burn that metal mind allomantically to get back far more than you put in. And that's how the Lord Ruler lived for 1,000 years. Now, to be very clear, Spook was not born a feruchemist, but hemalurgy allows feruchemical abilities to be stolen, which opens the door, at least in theory, to stealing something like atium feruchemy, which is the ability to store youth. Now, I'm not saying Spook would choose to do this over the initial theory of burning cadmium, but the possibilities certainly exist because Spook definitely had the knowledge and access to get that ability. Let me direct you to the history of Brandon Sanderson's answers to this very question, because even if you don't think the theories I presented are strong enough, the way he's consistently talked about Spook over the past 10 years might make you a believer, because Brandon is actually very good at clean answers over time. When something is false or someone truly dead, he will tell you. When a theory is pointing in the wrong direction, he'll eventually sort of shut it down, which is why Spook stands out. Because not only was Brandon very clear when he confirmed that Spook was still alive when they figured out the allomantic properties of cadmium, but also has consistently refused to answer if Spook is still alive. Instead, more often than not, hinting that we will find out more about Spook in the future.
There is more story to Spook. I won't confirm if he's dead or alive, but if I write Secret History 2, there will be some Spook stuff. All right? That's all I can say.
That's all I need.
Kelsier was very clear in Secret History that his ties to the physical realm had been severed. Are we then to assume that the current Thydakar / Lord of Scars is him teamed up with Spook, or have they used their knowledge of Hemalurgy to find different human hosts, or what's going on there?
Excellent question. This is partially a RAFO. But you should assume that things have happened to allow for what's going on. There are answers coming very soon.
All right, thank you.
With everything we know and how Brandon has consistently answered questions over the past decade, I am confident in the theory that Spook is still alive. Not because of one silver bullet piece of evidence, but because every layer of the Cosmere that could close this door doesn't. Canon never gives Spook a death. The text explicitly tells us he ruled for over a century and then stepped down. Not that he died, just that he chose to stop ruling. Mechanically, we know he has access to tools that make extreme longevity plausible. Cadmium gives him a way to time travel without aging normally. Hemalurgy and compounding give him access to additional power sets that we already know can extend life far beyond natural limits. And then there's Brandon. When asked directly whether Spook was alive at key points in later history, Brandon never says no. He says yes. And when asked whether Spook learned how to use new metals or moved into the future, he laughs and raffos over and over and over again. And that's not how Brandon talks about characters who are done. Put all that together and the picture that emerges is very clear. If there is a full Mistborn still walking around in the Cosmere, the only candidate who actually fits every requirement is Spook. Now, the next questions are, where is he and what is he doing? And there just happens to be a strange Scadrian world hopper in the Stormlight Archive. A man who goes by the name of 16 and leaves his room only once every 16 days, living quietly in Shadesmar with the Honorsbrand and lasting integrity. Is that Spook? That's a theory for another day. But let me know in comments if I've convinced you if Spook is still living, and also let me know if you think he might be 16 living in lasting integrity. As always, I appreciate you being here with me at Kolos Learns to Read, and I'll see you in the next video.